Welcome back to another revision tutorial with Miss Sweet. Today we are looking in greater depth at the poem Bayonet Charge. Bayonet Charge, by Ted Hughes, is not directly based on a specific war, allowing its themes and emotions to resonate with the broader human experience of conflict. Ted Hughes himself was not personally involved in any major wars. He was born in 1930 and therefore was too young to experience active military service in World War II. However, the aftermath of the war, the cultural and social shifts, as well as the collective trauma of the period, undoubtedly influenced his generation's perception of conflict. Hughes' poetry often explores elemental and primal aspects of human existence, and Bayonet Charge can be seen as a reflection on the psychological and existential challenges faced by individuals in the midst of war. The historical context of this poem is the First World War. Though it isn't stated explicitly, the khaki, bayonet, rifles, and nature of combat, trench warfare, make the setting clear. Life in the trenches of Europe during the war was terrifying and deadly, and the poor conditions caused frequent sickness and disease. Soldiers were often delirious with sleep deprivation, perhaps referenced in the first line. The soldier's epiphany in this poem, in which he suddenly seems to perceive the absurdity of war and the hollowness of patriotism, subtly mirrors the shift in public mood during the war from nervous excitement in the beginning to battle-weary depression by the end. The first and last stanzas are octets, meaning they have 8 lines, and the middle stanza is a septet, meaning it has just 7. The other important thing to notice is the way that the middle stanza differs from the first and last. While the first and last are primarily full of action, in the second stanza, time seems to stand still. This is the crux of the poem, the moment in which the soldier has an epiphany, suddenly seeing with painful clarity the absurdity and senselessness of war. And then, just as the reader is plunged right into the action by the poem's abrupt opening line, they are pulled violently out of the poem at the end. The soldier makes it to the target, the green hedge, but whether he survives or not is left up to the reader's imagination. Bayonet Charge is a free verse poem. Broadly speaking, this keeps the poem feeling unpredictable and chaotic, much like the battle it describes. The meter in the last line has an interesting effect, his terror's touchy dynamite. The stresses here are actually in an iambic pattern. This creates the sense that the soldier is juggling the dynamite from hand to hand, from stressed to unstressed syllable, unsure of what he's supposed to do. The meter here helps the poem end on a cliffhanger, leaving the reader to guess what happens next. Bayonet Charge is written in free verse. Broadly speaking, this adds to the poem's sense of instability and unpredictability, which is very fitting for a poem set on a battlefield. The phrase patriotic tear evokes the soldier's initial idealism, suggesting that he once believed in the noble war. This patriotic tear reflects the romanticized view of war that many soldiers are initially imbued with, a sense of purpose and duty to their country. The tear represents the emotional attachment to this belief, but its transient nature implies fragility, indicating that such feelings are fleeting when confronted with the brutal reality of war. The simile, sweating like molten iron, creates a vivid image of something emotional, turning into something hard, heavy, and industrial. The shift from tear to molten iron suggests a transformation, where the initial patriotic feeling, symbolized by the tear, is replaced by an overwhelming and painful physical sensation. Molten iron evokes heat, pressure, and weight, emphasizing the soldier's internal torment. The molten iron connotes the smelting process, implying that the soldier's feelings are being forged or transformed by the intensity of the battlefield, where raw emotion is replaced by a harsher, more mechanical response to his surroundings. This suggests that war transforms abstract ideals into physical suffering. The movement from the eye to the chest marks a significant shift. This downward trajectory suggests that the soldier's initial idealism has sunk into something more primal and visceral, a weight in his chest that he cannot ignore, molten iron. The heart, which is often associated with love and courage, is now burdened by something akin to pain or dread. This shift from the eye to the chest can be interpreted as the descent from thought to instinct, from idealism to the harsh realities of survival. It represents the soldier's growing awareness that his abstract beliefs cannot sustain him in the face of the physical and psychological demands of war. The imagery of molten iron also suggests the industrial nature of modern warfare. The use of iron evokes weapons, machinery, and the destructive power of human-made instruments of war. The fact that this iron is molten suggests that the soldier's emotions and body are being melted down and reshaped under the pressure of combat, just as iron is forged in a furnace. This highlights the dehumanizing effect of war, where the soldier is reduced to a tool or instrument within the larger war machine. The reference to molten iron connects the individual soldier's experience to the broader forces of industrial warfare, reflecting the way World War I, which the poem alludes to, mechanized death and destruction on an unprecedented scale. The list of ideals, king, honor, human dignity, invokes the traditional values often associated with patriotism, nationalism, and the moral justifications for war. The use of this triad of ideals serves to encapsulate the moral and nationalistic rhetoric that fuels much of the justification for war. Hughes' inclusion of these terms reflects the way soldiers are often motivated by abstract, high-minded principles. The use of etc. marks a turning point in the soldier's perception of these ideals, showing that they are not substantial enough to hold up under the pressures of war. By placing these weighty concepts alongside a dismissive etc., Hughes underscores the disillusionment that war brings. This word suggests that in the face of life-threatening danger, abstract ideals lose their meaning and are forgotten. The phrase critiques the way in which the noble language used to justify war becomes irrelevant when a soldier's focus shifts solely to survival. Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade is a celebration of patriotic duty, where the soldiers' unquestioning obedience to orders and their willingness to sacrifice themselves are portrayed as heroic. Tennyson idealizes the soldiers' courage and loyalty to their country, despite the flawed command that leads them into a disastrous charge. The repeated phrase, "There's not to reason why, there's but to do and die," emphasizes the soldiers' commitment to their duty without hesitation or doubt. Here, patriotism is presented as an unquestioning, almost sacred duty to the nation and its military commands, even in the face of death. Tennyson glorifies the soldiers as noble and honorable, with imagery like "honor the charge they made." Noble 600, emphasizing the soldiers' bravery and selflessness. The poem frames patriotism as a form of ultimate loyalty, where the soldier's sacrifice is seen as both tragic and heroic, ennobling them in the eyes of history and their nation. In contrast, Hughes' Bayonet Charge depicts a soldier's growing disillusionment with the ideals of patriotism. Hughes critiques the romanticized notion of war that emphasizes patriotism. The ideals of king, honor, human dignity are reduced to meaningless luxuries that the soldier discards in his desperation to survive. The dismissive use of etc. in the line king, honor, human dignity, etc. trivializes these ideals, showing that they are of little use when the soldier is confronted with the immediate threat of death. Here, patriotism is portrayed as an abstract concept that fails to hold up under the pressures of real combat, leading to the soldier's disillusionment. Tennyson adopts a reverent and celebratory tone, honoring the soldiers for their patriotic sacrifice. Even though the poem acknowledges the tragedy of the military blunder, it never questions the value of the soldiers' actions. Instead, it glorifies their commitment to duty, framing their sacrifice as part of a larger narrative of national pride. Tennyson's language, such as glory and honor, reflects an idealized view of patriotism, presenting it as something worthy of respect and admiration and even death. Their actions are depicted as embodying the values of the nation, and their sacrifice is meant to inspire future generations. The public nature of their patriotism is central to the poem's message. It is a communal ideal, deeply rooted in the fabric of British identity. Hughes' tone in Bayonet Charge is far more critical. The poem questions the value of patriotism by showing how it disintegrates under the pressure of combat. The soldier's initial belief in patriotic ideals is contrasted with his later realization that these concepts are irrelevant in the face of death. The poem's tone is one of disillusionment and alienation, as the soldier is left questioning the purpose of his actions. Unlike Tennyson's communal sense of patriotism, Hughes presents a much more personal and isolated struggle, with the soldier grappling with his own doubts and fears. The soldier's experience in Bayonet Charge is portrayed as an internal crisis, where his personal sense of patriotism is shattered by the physical and psychological realities of war. Unlike Tennyson's public heroism, Hughes focuses on the private disillusionment of the individual soldier, whose sense of purpose is undermined by the chaotic and dehumanizing nature of combat. Tennyson uses elevated language and imagery to depict the charge as a glorious. The use of repetition, such as half a league, half a league, half a league onward, creates a rhythmic, almost musical quality that echoes the forward momentum of the charge. The imagery of the Valley of Death and the Jaws of Death gives the charge a mythic quality, transforming the soldier's actions into a larger-than-life event. The language reinforces the idea that their sacrifice is a patriotic duty that transcends individual suffering. Words like hero, glory, and honor are frequently used to reinforce the idea of patriotic valor. In contrast, Hughes employs raw, fragmented language to reflect the soldier's confusion and fear. The imagery in Bayonet Charge is visceral and disturbing, such as bullets smacking the belly out of the air and the yellow hair that rolled like a flame. These images convey the soldier's disorientation and terror, emphasizing the physicality of war rather than its abstract ideals. The language is intentionally jarring, mirroring the soldier's internal conflict and the breakdown of his patriotic beliefs. The language in Bayonet Charge deconstructs the notion of patriotism by showing how it unravels in the face of fear and violence. Words like luxuries and etc. suggest a dismissive attitude toward the high-minded ideals of patriotism, reflecting the soldier's growing realization that these concepts have no place in the chaos of battle. The image of the yellow hair is startling and unusual, injecting a sense of surrealism into the poem. The hair, a fragile and innocent creature, contrasts sharply with the brutal environment of war. Its sudden appearance disrupts the soldier's focus on survival, adding to the chaotic and surreal nature of the battlefield. The color yellow often symbolizes cowardice, decay, or illness, which could reflect the degradation of the natural world due to war or symbolize the soldier's own fear and panic. Its erratic movement and desperate behavior mirror the soldier's own disoriented state. Hares are prey animals, suggesting that both the hare and the soldier are at the mercy of forces beyond their control, symbolizing the arbitrary and destructive power of war. crawled in a threshing circle. The image of the hare crawling and threshing creates a sense of desperation and suffering. Threshing typically refers to the separation of grain, suggesting that the hare's movement is chaotic. The circle imagery also implies futility. No matter how hard the hare struggles, it is trapped in an endless loop of pain and fear, much like the soldier is trapped in the cycle of war and violence. The hare's circular movement suggests an inescapable cycle of violence, both for the animal and for the soldier. This can be interpreted as a comment on the futility of war, where both human and non-human life are caught in a destructive and meaningless loop. This image of the hare with its mouth open but silent is haunting and adds to the eerie atmosphere of the poem. The juxtaposition of the visual image of a wide-open mouth with the auditory absence of sound creates a powerful tension. The silence of the hare is symbolic of the soldier's own voicelessness and powerlessness in the face of war. This image might also suggest the broader silencing of individuals during wartime, where the horrors experienced by soldiers often go unspoken or are impossible to articulate. It serves as a metaphor for the inexpressible trauma of war, where pain and suffering exist, but cannot always be communicated or understood. The violence in Bayonet Charge is human-made, rooted in the brutality of war. The soldier is bombarded by the physical and psychological effects of war and nature. Images like bullets smacking the belly out of the air reflect the violent intrusion of war on the natural world, highlighting how human violence disrupts and damages the environment. Nature in Bayonet Charge appears as collateral damage to human violence. The yellow hare that rolled like a flame symbolizes the innocent, fragile aspects of life that are caught up in the destructive forces of war. The hare's desperate and futile movements reflect the broader devastation of nature by war, emphasizing the indiscriminate and all-consuming nature of violence. In contrast, the violence in Heaney's storm on the island emerges from nature itself. Heaney presents nature as an impersonal and uncontrollable force, one that can be both beautiful and destructive. The storm's power is vividly depicted through the poem's imagery, such as the blast of the wind and the pummeling of the sea. Nature, in this context, is an active agent of violence. Unlike the soldier in Bayonet Charge, who is a participant in the violence, the people in Storm on the Island are passive recipients of nature's fury. The violence of the storm exposes humanity's vulnerability in the face of nature's overwhelming power. Heaney's description of the storm as something that leaves no trees, no natural shelter reinforces the idea that nature can be a hostile force, stripping away the protections humans rely on. The inhabitants of the island are left exposed and powerless. The tone of Bayonet Charge is chaotic and unsettling, reflecting the soldier's confusion and fear in the midst of battle. Hughes uses fragmented syntax and jarring imagery to create an atmosphere of disorientation, emphasizing the overwhelming nature of war's violence. The poem's language reflects the soldier's psychological breakdown, conveying the idea that violence not only destroys physically but also mentally. The tone is one of fear, confusion, and existential questioning, as the soldier grapples with the senselessness of the violence around him. In contrast, the tone of Storm on the Island is more contemplative, despite the violence of the storm. Heaney's speaker expresses a sense of acceptance, recognizing that the storm is a natural occurrence that must be endured. The poem's language, though it describes violent forces, is controlled and measured, reflecting the islanders' resilience. In reality, Bayonet Charge is a great poem to choose, as you can compare and contrast it easily with many of the poems in the anthology due to its broad and explicit themes of power and conflict, patriotism, identity, and the natural world. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this guide useful.